Hello Internet, Taliesin here, and welcome to a weekly reset special report. Not a proper weekly reset with hilarious intro or tie or Evitel, or in fact any of the things that are okay about the weekly reset, but a special report for when something crops up that we just can't wait the majority of a week to talk about. A risky maneuver, obviously, because, you know, if it turns out there is no more news for the rest of the week, then the actual weekly reset rolls along. It's going to be a little bit empty with nothing to talk about, and we'll all be like, oh man, I wish I hadn't done that special report talking about that thing, because if we could still talk about the thing now, then the weekly reset wouldn't be so empty and boring, especially now Longboy Watch is over and we're basically more starved for content than, well, someone who doesn't have beta and is still playing BFA. But that's a problem for future Taliesin in like a day or two, because today we are talking Shadowlands dungeons and the discovery, or at least I guess the bringing to light by Wowhead, link in the description below, head fans, that players who are members of certain covenants will receive certain group-wide perks in various dungeons. Yeah, I know. The Covenant system and its doling out of exclusive abilities already being controversial enough in large parts of the playing community. Don't forget how the Venthyr teleport ability is going to absolutely break the game, and how you are basically an idiot who seriously doesn't even know how to WoW if you don't pick Venthyr because of the teleport though. And those aren't my words, those are the words of all top players just weeks ago. And well, I haven't really been keeping up with their opinions on the game-breaking brokenness of the Venthyr teleport recently, but you know, I'm sure they all pretty much feel the same now still. So what is the situation here? Let me explain. First of all, it was discovered that being a member of the Ardenweald Night Fae Covenant in the Mists of Tirne Scythe dungeon allows those players access to an alternative route right at the beginning of the instance. Night Fae players being able to click on some overgrown routes to clear them and reveal the new route, which lets you skip a trash pack on your way to the first boss, Ingram Malok. Just before that first boss, there's also some more overgrown routes which Night Fae members can clear, but these routes don't reveal a route, instead a grove of mushrooms which will award players with either a 10% stamina or primary stat buff for 10 minutes, there being 10 mushrooms in total, enough for every member of the dungeon group to choose the buff that they want. And that's it. No, only joking, because also Night Fae players will be able to click on depleted anima seeds to unlock checkpoints in the dungeon after every boss. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, well, Taliesin, that's useless because I've played that dungeon back in alpha and there are checkpoints after every boss anyway. And that's a good point and very true, except obviously you're wrong, because those standard checkpoints were taken out of every dungeon a couple of builds ago and everyone thought it was a bug, but it seems that actually Blizz took them out specifically to give them back as a perk to Night Fae players, lol. And then there is the Necrotic Wake, a dungeon in Bastion, even though it's all green and Maldraxxus looking. Oh wow, is that a spoiler? I don't know. I'm gonna say yes, maybe a teeny tiny one, but no more from now on, I promise. But Bastion players will be able to use their tiny-legged owl slaves to reactivate 2 malfunctioning Goliaths, one just before the first boss and one just after, who will then emit 20 anima orbs, which can be picked up by players for a stacking 4% movement speed, haste, healing done, and damage reduction buff for 40 seconds. So if one player were to pick up all 40 of the orbs, then they would have an 80% buff. And that's it for the moment, but obviously there are going to be plenty more discoveries in other dungeons as the days go on, and it's probably safe to assume at this point that each covenant will have perks accessible exclusively to them in at least one of their 2 covenant dungeons, and that those perks are different and varied between the dungeons. The Necrotic Wake perks are not the same as the Tirne Scythe ones. Which is interesting, isn't it? Another cool little detail and flavouring for your Covenant choice, isn't it? It's fun, isn't it? And the player base totally agrees, obviously. This is horrible, please scrap immediately. Jesus, Blizzard, please stop this. This is the absolute worst direction to take the game. Why do they do this? It's like spitting in the face of your customers. It feels like a 6-year-old is in charge of gameplay decisions. Oh wait, the player base didn't like the thing where players belonging to one Covenant and only one Covenant per dungeon have access to special perks which make that dungeon easier? What a surprise! And let me be clear, I am not here to tell you that any of those comments are wrong. Unlike these ones. Leave them out of my plus, just make these non-mythic plus options. As long as it's left out of my plus, because yeah, if this stuff makes it to live, it's going into Mythic Plus, guaranteed. And to make it extra clear, I don't necessarily disagree with the criticism of this, because just like Covenants and their exclusive abilities, the potential worst-case scenario problems with these Covenant dungeon perks are immediately obvious to everyone. Bring the Covenant, not the class! This is going to add an extra layer of discrimination to what's already there! And yeah, as someone who is lucky enough to be in an awesome guild with nice people to run mythic dungeons with whenever I want, but who still finds myself pugging sometimes, mostly when I can't be bothered talking on voice comms, to be honest, sorry Alan, it's not hard to imagine listings in the Shadowlands group finder tool that do specify not just role, which, okay, they kind of have to, not just a meta class, not just a spiffy Raider IO score, but now, on top of all of that, you're also going to need to belong to the correct Covenant. So you can prune those overgrown roots so you can use the alternative route, and yes, I'm going to keep on using that as much as I can in any episode where we talk about this subject forever. Thanks for asking. And in a world where dungeon pugs are already super picky and elitist and slaves to a meta, is adding an extra layer to the glass meta onion really a great idea? That's the obviously apparent worst case scenario that comes with Covenant dungeon perks. So the question has to be asked, why have them? If this bad thing that we just identified can potentially happen, then why bother adding it to the game? Surely just throw the entire thing out. Oh, and by the way, do that with Covenant exclusive abilities too while we're at it. Especially that Venthyr teleport one, because I don't know if you've heard, but that shit breaks the game, okay? You're basically an idiot if you don't take the Venthyr teleport, and then everyone's gonna be in Venthyr, and there's gonna be no one to clear the routes and open the routes anyway. And I think in this situation, it's important to look at the effect and impact of Covenant dungeon perks, but I think it's also important when giving feedback to try and understand the intent. Right now, Blizzard haven't made a comment about this system. As I write, there's still been no blue post explaining the idea and why they're definitely going ahead with it, despite the reaction. I wouldn't be surprised if there is one before you even watch this video, but I don't think we need one to guess at their intent here. And I think there's probably two main intentions. Number one, the reason they won't tell you, because all of these myriad different choices and variables in Shadowlands, the Covenant abilities, the Soulbind trees, the conduits, the legendaries, and now these Covenant dungeon perks, seem to me to be designed with obscuring the meta as much as possible. This is Blizz kind of admitting that they can't stop there being a meta, and they probably shouldn't try beyond balancing things as best they can. So by adding so many of these little choices, little changes that some people have access to, other people playing the same class don't, it seems to me an attempt, in part at least, to just make a clear meta that much harder to even define. Now, very important point, that's not me saying that any of the things I just listed successfully achieve that aim. As it happens, I don't think they do. I think Ian is perhaps underestimating just how determined players are to find the absolute optimal way of playing, and even if all of these different options actually succeed in making the meta impossible to find, you're going to end up having some top players just basically agree on a standard anyway, like Venthyr teleports breaking the game for example, and then everyone is just going to take that as the meta anyway. So Blizzard haven't really achieved what they meant to. There's also the argument that this kind of obfuscation is what they tried with all the difficult to measure effects on Azerite armor, and that was horrible. So that's intent number one, I theorize. And intent number two, I think, is just because it's cool. It's just kind of fun, in theory, to have a warrior who is a Necrolord have this thing they can do, which is a different thing from the thing that a Venthyr warrior can do, even if the Necrolord warrior is total trash because they can't even teleport. It's just kind of cool and fun to have a Night Fae in your dungeon group who can clear routes for a new route. And that's not even a theory. We know that's kind of cool and fun and neat because it's not a new thing. It's happened in dungeons before, on multiple occasions. A recent example being in Tol Dagor, with lockpickers being able to open different routes through the dungeon, and yeah, it's kind of cool and neat. You could argue that the Covenant dungeon perks are far more inclusive and broad and less specific than lockpickers in Tol Dagor, because A, every player will have at least one, but probably two dungeons where they can do their cool stuff, and B, no one should ever do Tol Ga'Dor because it's a bad and evil dungeon which is evil and wrong. And seriously, screw Tol Ga'Dor. I hate it so much I never even bothered learning how to say it properly. And in the exact same way that I can definitely see and appreciate and dread all of the very obvious problems that might come through having Covenant exclusive abilities, and yet still think it sounds kind of fun and look forward to it, so I can obviously see the potential problems that could arise from Covenant dungeon perks, and yet still think it's a fun sounding idea and want it in the game. So I guess for me, the ideal place to be would be giving Blizz the feedback they need to avoid that worst case disaster scenario and keep the cool, neat thing in place. Let's look at those problems that I and others have described and try and gauge just how bad they actually are. Because yes, definitely, as I said, I 100% agree that you will go to the group finder in Shadowlands and you will be able to find groups that are specifically asking that applicants be a certain covenant. Venthyr, obviously, because of the game-breaking teleport. But okay, maybe this is a trash noob group who are trying to compensate, and so they're asking for Night Fae or Kyrian or Necrolord. I'm certain that will happen, and yes, it will be an extra layer of discrimination. Unless you're actually in that covenant, in which case, obviously, it's going to help you get into the group. Ah, but Taliesin, I hear you cry. There's only a 25% chance that you'll be in the right covenant, and that's not good odds. 25% is a rubbish chance. And for the sake of argument, let's say you're right. There's also, in that case, only a 25% chance that you'll end up with no one in the right covenant for your intended dungeon if you pick players completely at random and with no care for their covenant at all. And you only need one player in the covenant per group, and since the odds are overwhelmingly in favour of any group having at least one member of that covenant naturally, a forming group having to specify a player's covenant in Group Finder is going to be a lot rarer than I think we're giving it credit for. So yes, it will happen, more likely for pugs pushing higher keys, you'd have thought, but also for lower level groups who just think it would be cool and neat to be able to do that cool thing with the anima orbs because it sounds fun, or because it might help them bag a higher key than they might otherwise be capable of. But yes, it is going to happen, undeniably. So the question we've got to ask is, does the bad from that happening in those numbers outweigh the cool neatness of the idea? And for me, you know, I'm always going to lean instinctively towards try the cool neat thing, but you may feel differently depending on how you play the game, and that's okay. You're not wrong for thinking that. Except if you think that the Venthyr teleport is going to break the game, because no, it turns out most top players now don't think that anymore. After actually testing it and seeing the dungeons and raids that Shadowlands has, most of those players now think that their initial assumption and reading of that ability may have been a little bit inaccurate, and in fact, you are not now an automatic scrub for not taking it. What a surprise! But that doesn't mean that anyone criticising Covenant dungeon perks is wrong in the same way. Not at all. And to prove it, I'm going to criticise Covenant dungeon perks. I think they're a cool, neat idea, yes, but I think of the ones we've seen overall, they're a bit too good. I really like the idea of a Covenant member being able to help out their team in one of their own dungeons, but I feel like a 10% main stat bonus for 10 minutes isn't cool and neat so much as pretty much mandatory. Likewise with those anima orbs, and yeah, it's only a 40-second duration, but your top DPS having an 80% haste buff just before that first boss obviously makes that boss considerably easier. Likewise, those tricky mobs after the boss where the second construct is, and checkpoints too. Just because they were there for everyone originally before Blizz made them only unlockable to the dungeon's covenant, it feels more like a punishment than a reward, and I think they should rethink that one as well. Now, the routes, those are cool. I'm down with the routes. That's the kind of thing which is neat and cool and might not even be that useful depending on the way your group wants to go anyway. After all, where can a bunch of overgrown roots get you that the Venthyr teleport can't? Okay, I'm sorry, I'll leave that one now. And that's a delicate balancing game too, isn't it? You need the perks to be good enough that they are neat and cool, but not so much that you feel totally shit if your group doesn't have them. I don't think the current iterations that we've seen quite nail that, but I'm looking forward to seeing what Blizz has in store for other dungeons, and if any of those ideas work a little bit better. That's what beta is for, after all, making ideas work beta. This is why we don't do many special reports, sorry. But what do you guys think? How much impact do you think Covenant perks will have on the game? And what do you think the good and bad of that will be? Is it going to stop you ever finding a group with your feral druid ever again? Is it the golden ticket that your feral druid has been waiting for this whole time? Why on earth are you playing a feral druid, by the way? Let us know in the comments below. And thanks for joining us today. If you like this video, don't thank us. Thank our patrons who give their actual real life money to make all my haircuts, videos happen. happen. Guys, thank you. Without you, there would be a whole lot less Taliesin and Evitel. If you didn't like it, downvote the shit out of it. Remember, my name is D Mephisto. I very stupidly left out the D in the last weekly reset because I'm an idiot, but we are back and doing it properly now. Now, my name is Taliesin from me and Evitel and Anirin too. Cheerio.